For 60 years, they owned the water. Mercury, Yamaha, Honda, names that meant power, names that meant trust. But right now, at ports across America, something is arriving. Engines that look identical. Engines that cost 70% less. Engines stamped with names you've never heard of. And the giants? They're terrified. Dealers are sitting on millions in unsold inventory. Factories are cutting shifts. And the price war? It's just getting started. But here's what nobody's telling you. Some of those American engines, they're already made in China. The companies just don't want you to know. Before you buy your next outboard, before you spend a single dollar, you need to see what's really happening behind closed doors. Now I have to ask you, would you trust a $900 engine to bring you home? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one. And if you want the truth about what's coming for your boat and your wallet, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this story is far from over. Let's begin. In 1939, in a small Wisconsin town called Fond du Lac, a man named Carl Kiekhaefer looked at a failing outboard motor company and saw something nobody else could see. He saw the future of American boating. Within a decade, Mercury Marine would become the heartbeat of recreational water travel in the United States. Within half a century, it would dominate the industry. That factory in Wisconsin grew into something extraordinary. Today, Brunswick Corporation, Mercury's parent company, employs nearly 15,000 people across 25 countries. Their sprawling manufacturing complex remains one of the largest outboard production facilities on Earth. And for 6 consecutive years, Forbes has named them one of America's best large employers. This is not just a company, this is an institution. By 2024, Mercury controlled roughly half of every outboard engine sold in America. At the Miami International Boat Show that year, more than 50% of all outboards on display carried the Mercury name. At boat shows across Europe, that number climbed even higher, reaching 55% overall and nearly 70% in the premium high horsepower category. When Americans thought about outboard motors, they thought about Mercury. It was that simple. But Mercury was not alone on the water. Starting in the 1970s, a new wave of competition arrived from across the Pacific. Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki. These Japanese manufacturers brought precision engineering and aggressive pricing to American shores. The initial reaction from American boaters was skepticism. Japanese engines were dismissed as inferior copies, cheap alternatives that would never match American craftsmanship. That skepticism did not last. By 2004, the competition had grown so fierce that Brunswick filed an anti-dumping petition against Yamaha with the United States Department of Commerce. The government imposed an 18.98% duty on Yamaha engines, essentially accusing the Japanese of selling their products below fair market value. But the International Trade Commission reviewed the evidence and rejected Brunswick's claim entirely. They found no injury to American manufacturers. The duty was nullified. The Japanese brands had earned their place. What emerged over the following decades was something remarkable, an unspoken equilibrium. Mercury set the ceiling on pricing, and the Japanese brands positioned themselves just slightly below. Not undercutting dramatically, not starting price wars, just competing on quality, reliability, and marginal price differences. A 300 horsepower Mercury might cost $24,000. A comparable Yamaha might cost $23,000. A Suzuki perhaps $22,000. The differences were meaningful, but manageable. This equilibrium served everyone. Dealers maintained healthy margins. Manufacturers invested in research and development. Consumers chose based on brand loyalty, feature preferences, and dealer relationships rather than desperate bargain hunting. The American outboard market had found its balance. Behind this balance stood something even more valuable: infrastructure. Thousands of authorized dealers across North America. Certified technicians trained on specific engine platforms. Warranty networks that could service a boat in Florida or Alaska with equal confidence. When you bought a Mercury or a Yamaha, you were not just buying an engine, you were buying access to a system built over generations, and the prices reflected that system. A 20-horsepower Yamaha 4-stroke might cost $4,500. A comparable Mercury ran about the same. These were not arbitrary numbers. They represented decades of engineering, global supply chains, dealer margins, warranty reserves, and marketing budgets. Every dollar had a purpose. For American boaters, the math was straightforward. Pay the premium. Trust the brand. Get home safe. But in 2006, in a city most Americans had never heard of, something began that would challenge every assumption the industry had built. Suzhou is an ancient city in eastern China, known for its classical gardens and silk production. It is not a name that appears in American boating magazines. But in 2006, a group of engineers with an unusual background gathered there to start something new. These were not amateurs. Several had worked with Outboard Marine Corporation, the American company that once owned Evinrude and Johnson. They understood Western engineering, they understood Western markets, and they understood exactly how outboard motors were built. The company they founded was called Parsun Power Machine. Within 2 decades, Parsun would export engines to more than 100 countries. Their factory would produce 60,000 outboard motors every year. And in 2024, they announced something that sent ripples through the industry: a new 115 horsepower platform. They were no longer content with small auxiliary engines. They were coming for the mainstream market. Parsun was not alone. Hidea emerged from Hangzhou with production capacity of 100,000 units annually. Hankai became a familiar name on Amazon and eBay, selling directly to American consumers. Dozens of smaller manufacturers joined them, all operating from the same playbook. And that playbook had one central strategy: reverse engineer the best Japanese designs and manufacture them at a fraction of the cost. The results were striking. Open the cowling on a Parsun or Hidea engine, and you will find architecture that looks remarkably familiar. The carburetor designs mirror Yamaha. The lower unit geometry matches Japanese specifications. In many cases, the parts are directly interchangeable. Mechanics report that replacement components listed under Chinese brand names carry the same part numbers as Yamaha originals. This is not coincidence. This is strategy. One forum user captured the reality bluntly. He purchased a 6-horsepower Hankai, peeled off the stickers, and observed that you could replace them with Mercury logos, and nobody would know the difference. The external appearance, the control layout, the mounting system. All of it echoed designs that took Japanese engineers decades to perfect. But appearance is one thing. Price is another. Consider what these numbers mean for an American buyer. A 6-horsepower 2-stroke from a Japanese manufacturer costs approximately $1,800. The Chinese equivalent sells for around $550. A 9.9-horsepower 4-stroke runs about $2,800 from established brands. The Chinese version costs under $1,000. At the 20-horsepower range, Japanese engines command $4,500 or more. Chinese alternatives start around $1,500. These are not small differences. These are 67 to 70% savings. For a buyer on a budget, for a first-time boat owner, for someone who uses their engine 20 hours a year at a lake cottage, these numbers change everything. But the boating community remained deeply divided. Critics pointed to quality concerns that seemed endemic to Chinese manufacturing. Service technicians in Russia reported engines failing within a year, with seals leaking and raw metal corroding. Forum users described a lottery effect, where 2 identical engines might perform completely differently. Warranty support remained virtually non-existent in North America. Parsun offered 3 years of coverage, but it covered parts only. No labor, no dealer network, no roadside assistance when you are stranded miles from shore. Defenders offered a different perspective. They compared Chinese outboards to harbor freight tools. Yes, they might not match the longevity of premium brands, but they work. they get the job done. And when the price difference means you can buy 3 engines for the cost of 1, the calculation shifts. The question was no longer whether Chinese engines existed. The question was whether American boaters would trust them, and then the economy made that question urgent. The year 2024 was supposed to be a recovery. The pandemic chaos had faded. Supply chains had stabilized. Americans were ready to return to the water. At least that was what the industry believed. Reality told a different story. Global boat sales collapsed by 9.1% in the first half of the year. The National Marine Manufacturers Association confirmed the damage in their December report. 231,576 new powerboats sold across the entire year, a significant decline from the previous 12 months. The total value of boats sold worldwide dropped from $4.56 billion to $4.22 billion. Nearly $350 million simply vanished from the market. Walk into a dealership during this period, and you would see the evidence everywhere. New boats sat on lots for an average of 243 days before finding buyers. Used boats moved faster, averaging 165 days because their prices had already adjusted to reality. Some dealers still had 2022 models wrapped in shrink plastic, unsold after 2 full years. Industry veterans said they had not seen leftover inventory like this in decades. The cause was no mystery: interest rates. The Federal Reserve had raised borrowing costs to levels not seen in a generation. Consumers who once financed boats at 3 or 4% now faced rates approaching double digits. A monthly payment that seemed manageable in 2021 became crushing in 2024. Qualified buyers with excellent credit simply refused to sign. It was not that they could not afford boats. It was that they refused to pay that much for money. The ripple effect spread across the recreational vehicle industry. Wakeboat sales dropped 47%. Zero-turn mower sales fell 60%. Phoenix Boats, a respected base boat manufacturer, cut production by 75% from their peak. Camus shifted focus away from freshwater fishing boats toward saltwater models, chasing whatever demand remained. And then the tariffs arrived. The Trump administration implemented a 24% tariff on Japanese outboard imports, catching Yamaha, Suzuki, Honda, and Tohatsu in the crossfire. The marine industry found itself paralyzed, waiting for trade negotiations that might take months or years to resolve. Dealers hoarded pre-tariff inventory, knowing that once it sold, replacement stock would cost dramatically more. Industry analysts described the situation as essentially frozen, with nobody certain which strategic options to activate. Chinese goods faced their own tariff wall. Section 301 duties had accumulated over years of trade tension, climbing as high as 145% during the most heated moments before temporary rollbacks brought them down to 30%. On paper, this should have protected American and Japanese manufacturers from Chinese competition. The math said otherwise. Consider a Chinese 20-horsepower outboard priced at $1,500. Add a 30% tariff, and the cost rises to $1,950. Now compare that to a Mercury or Yamaha at $4,500 or more. Even with tariffs, the Chinese engine costs less than half. The protection was real, but it was not enough to close a gap that wide. Mercury Marine responded with investment. They expanded capacity at their Fond du Lac headquarters. They gained 110 basis points of market share in 2024, pushing their retail dominance to 49.4%. Their strategy was clear: double down on premium positioning, advanced technology, and the dealer network that Chinese brands could not match. But Mercury faced an uncomfortable truth that few discussed publicly. Their own outboards under 60 horsepower were manufactured in China or Japan. Propellers, impellers, piston rings, electrical components for their larger engines often came from Chinese suppliers. The line between American and Chinese manufacturing had blurred long ago. The industry just preferred not to advertise it. The marine industry stands at a crossroads it did not anticipate and cannot fully control. But before we look forward, we must acknowledge that this moment is not unprecedented. History offers a guide for those willing to see it. In the 1970s, American boaters dismissed Japanese engines as cheap imitations that would never match domestic quality. Dealers refused to stock them. Mechanics refused to service them. Brand loyalists swore they would never mount foreign iron on American transoms. Within 20 years, Yamaha and Honda had become synonymous with reliability. The skeptics were wrong. The Japanese earned their place through persistence and continuous improvement. The question now is whether Chinese manufacturers will follow the same trajectory. Early signs suggest they are trying. Harsoon has pursued EPA certification for environmental compliance in American markets. Multiple manufacturers have obtained CE certification for European sales. The quality complaints that dominated early reviews are being addressed, slowly but measurably. 10 years ago, Chinese outboards were dismissed as dangerous junk. Today, the criticism has softened to acknowledgments that they work acceptably for casual users. That shift matters. Meanwhile, an entirely different disruption looms on the horizon: electrification. Mercury has launched its Avator line of electric outboards, starting with smaller models and expanding steadily. Torqeedo has established itself as a premium electric brand. Vision Marine Technologies set acceleration records at the Lake of the Ozarks shootout with a 180 horsepower battery-powered system. The technology works. The question is whether consumers will adopt it. Electric propulsion grows at 5.08% annually, faster than the overall marine market. Environmental regulations increasingly favor zero-emission alternatives, and Chinese manufacturers are already producing electric outboards at prices that undercut Western competitors. The next disruption may not be about gasoline engines at all. Tariff uncertainty compounds every strategic decision. The United States and Japan continue negotiations that could reshape pricing overnight. The United States and China cycle through truces and escalations that make long-term planning nearly impossible. A 90-day tariff pause gets extended, then expires, then renews under different terms. Manufacturers describe the environment as paralyzed, with nobody certain which options to pursue. For established brands, the path forward requires uncomfortable choices. Mercury and Yamaha can double down on premium positioning, emphasizing quality, warranty support, and dealer networks. They can accelerate electric development to capture emerging demand. They can accept that entry-level market segments may be lost to Chinese competition permanently. None of these options are painless. All of them require abandoning assumptions that held true for generations. For Chinese brands, the challenge is credibility. They must build dealer networks in North America, a process that took Japanese manufacturers decades to complete. They must achieve consistent quality that silences critics. They must convince American buyers that saving $2,000 today will not cost $5,000 in problems tomorrow. The price advantage opens doors. Earning trust is what keeps them open. And for you, watching this unfold from your dock or your garage, the decision is ultimately personal. If you run a charter operation with clients depending on your reliability, the calculus favors proven brands with proven support. If you fish a quiet lake twice a month during summer, the mathematics shift considerably. Neither choice is wrong. Both reflect rational responses to different circumstances. What remains certain is that the outboard industry will never return to the equilibrium it enjoyed for decades. Chinese competition is not a temporary disruption. It is a permanent feature of the market. How American and Japanese manufacturers respond will determine whether they lead the next generation of boating or become cautionary tales about failing to adapt. The engines arriving at American ports today carry unfamiliar names, but the forces behind them are as old as industry itself: competition, innovation, and the relentless pressure of better value. The only question is whether you are ready to trust the math.